working of the Indian Constitution. In the chapters, in this chapter, we follow that you will, in this chapter that follow, you will read information about the various aspects of the working of our constitution. You will learn about the various institutions of the government in our country and their relationships with each other. But before you begin to read about the elections, governments, and presidents and prime minister, it is necessary to understand that the entire structure of the government and the various principles that bind the institutions of the government have their origin in the Constitution of India. After studying this chapter, you will learn what a constitution means, what a constitution does to the society, how constitutions govern the allocation of the power in the society, and what was the way in which the Constitution of India was made. And फिर उसके बाद जो next है वो क्या है, why do we need a constitution, what is a constitution, what are its functions, and what role does it perform for the society, how does the constitution relate to our daily existence. Answering these questions is not as difficult as you might think. Constitution allows coordination and assurance. Imagine yourself to be a member of the reasonably large group. Further, imagine that this group has the following characteristics. The members of this group are diverse in the various ways and they have different religious allegiances. Some are Hindu, some are Muslims, some are Christians, and some perhaps profess no religion at all. They are also varied in the many different respects, and they pursue different professions, have different abilities, have different hobbies, different tastes in everything from films to books. Some are rich and some are poor, some are old, some young. Imagine further that members of this group are likely to have disputes over the various aspects of life. How much property should one be allowed to own, and should it be compulsory that every child be sent to school, or should the parents be allowed to decide how much should this ground spend on its safety and security, or should it build more parks instead? Should group be allowed to discriminate against some of its members? Every question will elect a variety of answers from the different people, but for all their diversity, this group has to live together, and they are dependent upon each other in the various ways, and they require the cooperation of each other, what will enable the group to live together peacefully. So this group is very much like the people of my village, and yes, this could be my colony as well. Does this apply to your village or town or colony too? अब यहाँ पे उसके बाद नेक्स्ट जो है वो क्या है, वन मे से दैट परहैप्स मेंबर्स ऑफ दिस ग्रुप कैन लिव टुगेदर इफ दे कैन एग्री ऑन सम बेसिक रूल्स. व्हाई विल द ग्रुप नीड सर्टेन बेसिक रूल्स? थिंक ऑफ व्हाट वुड हैपन इन द एब्सेंस ऑफ सम basic rules. Every individual would be insecure simply because they would not know what members of this group could do to each other, who could claim rights over what. Any group will need some basic rules that are publicly promulgated and known to all the members of that group to achieve a minimal degree of coordination. But these rules must not only be known, they must also be enforceable. If citizens have no assurance that others will follow these rules, and any group will need some basic rules that are publicly promulgated and known to all the members of the group to achieve a minimal degree of coordination. But these rules must not only be known, they must also be enforceable. And if citizens have no assurance that others will follow these rules, and they will themselves have no reasons to follow these rules, saying that the rules are legally enforceable gives an assurance to everybody that others will follow, and these, for if they do not do so, they will be punished. The first function of a constitution is to provide a set of basic rules that allow for the minimal coordination amongst the members of a society. Now here activity is given. Enact the thought experiment of this section in the classroom. The entire class should discuss and arrive at some decisions that would apply to everyone for this entire session. And the decision could be about how would the class representative be chosen, which decisions will the representative be able to take on the behalf of the entire class. Are there some decisions that the class representatives cannot take without consulting the entire class? You can add any other items to this list, या फिर collection of common kitty for the class, organization of picnic and trips, sharing of common resources, as long as everyone agrees to it. Make sure that you include those subjects that have led to any differences in the past. How to revise these decisions in case you need to. Write down all these decisions on a paper and pen it up on paper and put it up on the notice board. Which problems did you encounter in this decision? Were there differences among the different students? How did you resolve these differences, and did the entire class gain something from this exercise? Now here specifications of decision making powers. A constitution is a body of fundamental principles according to which a state is constituted or governed. But what should these fundamental rules be, and what makes them fundamental? And well, the first question you will have to decide is who gets to decide what the laws governing the society should be. You may want rule X, but rule X, but others may want rule Y. How do we decide whose rules or preferences should govern us? You may think the rules you want everyone live by are the best, but others think that their rules are the best. How do we resolve this dispute? So, even before you decide what rules should govern this group, you have to decide who gets to decide, and the constitution has to provide an answer to this question, and it specifies the basic allocation of the power in the society, and it decides who gets to decide what the laws will be. In principle, this question who gets to decide can be answered in many ways. In a monarchical constitution, a monarch decides. In some constitutions like the old Soviet Union, one single party was given the power to decide, but in democratic constitutions, broadly speaking, the people get to decide. But this matter is not so simple, because even if you answer that the people should decide, it will be not answer the question, how should the people decide? For something to be law, should everyone agree to it? Should the people directly vote on each matter as the ancient Greeks did, or should the people express their preferences by electing representatives? But if the people act through their representatives, how should these representatives be elected? How many should there be? In the Indian constitution, for example, it is specified that in most instances parliament gets to decide laws and policies, and that parliament itself be organized in a particular manner. Before identifying what the laws in any given society is, you have to identify who has the authority to enact it. If parliament has the authority to enact laws, there must be a law that bestows this authority on the parliament. In the first place, this is the function of the constitution. It is an authority that constitutes government in the first place. The second function of a constitution is to specify who has the power to make decisions in a society. It decides how the government will be constituted. Here, countries of the European Union try to create a European constitution, and the attempt failed. Here is a cartoonist's impression of this attempt. Does this always happen in any constitution making? Here, limitations on the powers of the government, but this is clearly not enough. Suppose you decided who had the authority to make the decisions, but then this authority passed laws that you thought were patently unfair. It prohibited you from the practicing your religion, for instance, or it enjoined that clothes of a certain color were prohibited, or that you were not free to sing certain songs, or that people who belong to a particular group, caste, or religion would always have to serve others and would not be allowed to retain any property, or that government could arbitrarily arrest someone, or that only people of certain skin color would be allowed to draw water from the wells. You would obviously think these laws were unjust and unfair, and even though they were passed by a government that had come into existence based on the certain procedures, there would be something obviously unjust about that government enacting these laws. So the third function of a constitution is to set some limits on what a government can impose on the citizens. These limits are fundamental in the sense that governments may never trespass them. Constitutions limit the power of the government in many ways. The most common way of limiting the power of the government is to specify certain fundamental rights that all of us possess as citizens, and which no government can ever be allowed to violate. And the exact content and interpretation of these rights varies from constitution to constitution, but most constitutions will protect a basic cluster of rights. Citizens will be protected from being arrested arbitrarily and for no reason, and this is one basic limitation upon the power of the government. Citizens who will normally have the right to some basic liberties, to freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and freedom of association, freedom to conduct trade or business, etc. In practice, these rights can be limited during the times of national emergency, and the constitution specifies the circumstances under which these rights may be withdrawn. Here, aspirations and goals of a society. Most of the older constitutions limited themselves largely to allocating decision-making power and setting some limits to the government's power, but many 20th century constitutions, of which the Indian constitution is the finest example, also provide an enabling framework for the government to do certain positive things, to express the aspirations and goals of the society. And the Indian Constitution was particularly innovative in this respect. Societies with deep entrenched inequalities of various kinds will not only have to set the limits on the power of the government, they will also have to enable that and empower the government to take positive measures to overcome forms of inequality or deprivation. उसके बाद जो नेक्स्ट है वो क्या है? For example, India aspires to be a society that is free of caste discrimination. If this is our society's aspiration, and the government will have to be enabled or empowered to take all the necessary steps to achieve and this goal. In a country like South Africa, which had a deep history of racial discrimination, its new constitution had to enable the government to end the racial discrimination more positively. Constitution may enshrine the aspirations of the society, and the framers of the Indian Constitution, for example, thought that each individual in the society should have all that is necessary for uh, them to lead a life of minimal dignity and social self-respect, minimal material well-being, education, etc. ठीक है, उसके बाद जो नेक्स्ट ये क्या है, the constitution makers have to address themselves to very different aspirations. Here is Nehru trying to balance between different regions and ideologies. Can you identify that what these different groups stand for? Who do you think prevailed in this balancing act? The Indian constitution enables the government to take positive welfare measures, some of which are legally enforceable. As we go on studying the Indian constitution, we shall find that such enabling provisions have the support of the preamble to our constitution, and these provisions are found in the section on the fundamental rights, and the directive principle of state policy also enjoins government to fulfill certain aspirations to the people. The fourth function of a constitution is to enable the government to fulfill the aspirations of the society and create conditions for a just society. So what does it take to write nice things in the constitution? What is the point in writing down lofty aspirations and goals if they cannot change the life of the people? Here, enabling provisions of the Constitution. Constitutions are not only rules and regulations controlling the powers of the government, they also give powers to the government for pursuing collective good of the society. Constitution of South Africa assigns many responsibilities to the government. It wants the government to take measures to promote the conservation of the nature, make efforts to protect persons or groups subjected to unfair discrimination, and provides that the government must progressively ensure adequate housing to all, healthcare, etc. In the case of Indonesia also, the government is enjoined to establish and conduct national education system, and the Indonesian constitution ensures that the poor and destitute children will be looked after by the government. Now, fundamental identity of the people. So finally, and perhaps even most importantly, constitution expresses the fundamental identity of the people, and this means the people as a collective entity come into being only through the basic constitution. It is by agreeing to a basic set of the norms about how one should be governed and who should be governed that one forms a collective identity. One has many sets of identities that exist prior to a constitution, but by agreeing to certain basic norms and principles, one constitutes one's basic political identity. Second, constitutional norms are the overarching framework within which one pursues individual aspirations, goals, and freedoms, and the Constitution sets authoritative constraints upon what one may or may not do. It defines the fundamental values that we may not trespass. So, the Constitution also gives one a moral identity. Third and finally, it may be the case that many basic political and moral values are now shared across the different constitutional traditions. If one looks at the constitutions around the world, they differ in many respects in the form of government, and they enjoin in many procedural details, but they also share a good deal. Most modern constitutions create a form of government that is democratic in some respects. Most claim to protect certain basic rights, but constitutions are different in the way they embody conceptions of national identity. Most nations are an amalgamation of complex set of historic traditions. They weave together the diverse groups that reside within the nation in a different ways. For example, German identity was constituted by the being ethnically German, and the constitution gave expression to this identity, and the Indian constitution on the other hand does not make ethnic identity a criterion for the citizenship. Different nations embody different conceptions of what the relationship. उसके बाद देखो यहाँ पे क्या बात की गई है. The writing of the new Iraqi constitution after the collapse of Saddam Hussein's regime saw a lot of conflict between different ethnic groups in the country. What do these different people stand for? And compare the conflict depicted here with that depicted in the earlier cartoons for the European Union and India. Here, the constitution gives expression to this identity, and the Indian constitution, on the other hand, does not make ethnic identity a criterion for the citizenship. Different nations embody different conceptions of what the relationship between the different regions of a nation and the central government should be. This relationship constitutes the national identity of the country. Now check your progress. Here are some provisions of the Indian and other constitutions for each of these rights, the function that this provision performs. The government cannot order any citizen to follow or not to follow any religion. Here, the government must try to reduce the inequalities in income and wealth. The president has the power to appoint the prime minister, and the constitution is the supreme law that everyone has to obey. Indian citizenship is not limited to the people of any race, caste or religion. Limitations on the power of the government, ये चीज़ें जो है यहाँ पे आपको भरनी है. एंड देन उसके बाद जो नेक्स्ट है वो है द अथॉरिटी ऑफ अ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. वी हैव आउटलाइंड सम ऑफ द फंक्शंस ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन परफॉर्म्स. These functions explain why most societies have a constitution. But there are three further questions we can ask about the constitutions. What is a constitution? How effective is a constitution? Is a constitution just? In most countries, constitution is a compact document that comprises a number of articles about the state, specifying how the state is to be constituted and what norms it should follow. When we ask for the constitution of a country, we are usually referring to this document, but some countries, the United Kingdom, for instance, do not have one single document that can be called the constitution. Rather, they have a series of documents and decisions that, taken collectively, are referred to as the constitution. So we can say that the constitution is the document or set of documents that seeks to perform the functions that we mentioned above. But many constitutions around the world exists only on paper and they are mere words existing on a parchment. The crucial question is how effective is a constitution, what makes it effective, and what ensures that it has a real impact on the lives of the people. Making a constitution effective depends upon many factors. Now, mode of promulgation. This refers to how a constitution comes into being, who crafted the constitution, and how much authority did they have. In many countries, constitutions remain defunct because they are crafted by the military leaders or leaders who are not popular and do not have the ability to carry the people with them. The most successful constitutions like India, South Africa, and the United States are constitutions which were created in the aftermath of the population national movement. Although India's constitution was formally created by a constituent assembly between December 1946 and November 1949, it drew upon a long history of the nationalist movement that had a remarkable ability to take along different sections of the Indian society together, and the constitution drew enormous legitimacy from the fact that it was drawn up by the people who enjoyed immense public credibility, who had the capacity to negotiate and command the respect of a wide cross section of the society, and who were able to convince the people that the constitution was not an instrument for the aggrandizement of their personal power. And the final document reflected the broad national consensus at the time. Here he is thinking, what do people do if they find out that their constitution is not just? What happens to the people when a constitution exists only on the paper? फिर उसके बाद जो नेक्स्ट है वो ये है, यहाँ पे डिबेट ओवर द constitution making in the Nepal. Making a constitution is not always an easy and smooth affair. Nepal is an example of the complicated nature of the constitution making. Since 1948, Nepal has had five constitutions in 1948, 1951, 1959, 1962 and 1919. But all these constitutions were granted by the King of Nepal. The 1990 constitution introduced a multi-party competition, though the king continued to hold final powers in the many respects. For many years, Nepal was faced with militant political agitations for restructuring the government, and the main issue was the role of the monarchy in the constitution of Nepal. Some groups in the Nepal wanted to abolish the institution of monarchy and establish republican form of government. Others believed that it may be useful to shift to limit monarchy with a reduced role for the king, and the king himself was not ready to give up powers. He took over all powers in October 2002. Many political parties and organizations demanded the formation of a new constituent assembly, and the Communist Party of the Nepal, Maoist, was in the forefront of the struggle for a popularly elected constituent assembly. Finally, under pressure of the popular agitations, the king had to install a government acceptable to the agitating parties. This government has stripped the king of almost all the powers in 2008. Nepal emerged as a democratic republic after abolishing the monarchy. Finally, Nepal adopted a new constitution in 2015. Here, some countries have subjected their constitution to a full-fledged referendum where all the people vote on the desirability of the constitution. And the Indian constitution was never subjected to such a referendum, but nevertheless carried enormous public authority because it had the consensus and backing of leaders who were themselves popular. Although the constitution itself was not subjected to a referendum, the people adopted it as their own by abiding by its provisions. Therefore, the authority of the people who enact the constitution helps determine in the part its prospects for the success. The substantive provisions of a constitution, it is the hallmark of a successful constitution that it gives everyone in the society some reasons to go along with its provisions. A constitution that, for instance, allowed permanent majorities to oppress the minorities groups within the society would give minorities no reasons to go along with the provisions of the constitution. Or a constitution that systematically privileged some members at the expense of the others, or that systematically entrenched the power of the small groups in the society, would cease to command allegiance. If any group feels that her identity is being stifled, they will have no reasons to abide by the constitution. No constitution by itself achieves perfect justice, but it has to convince people that it provides the framework for the purchasing basic justice. And do this thought experiment, ask yourselves this question: what would be the content of some basic rules in the society such that they gave everyone a reason to go along with them? The more a constitution preserves the freedom and equality of all its members, the more likely it is to succeed? Does the Indian Constitution, broadly speaking, give everyone a reason to go along with its broad outlines? After studying this book, one should be able to answer this question in the affirmative. Now, balanced institutional design. Balanced institutional design में क्या होता है? Constitutions are often subverted not by the people but by the small groups who wish to enhance their own power. Well-crafted constitutions fragment power in the society intelligently so that no single group can subvert the constitution. One way of such intelligent designing of a constitution is to ensure that no single institution acquires monopoly of the power, and this is often done by the fragmenting power across the different institutions. And the Indian Constitution, for example, horizontally fragments power across the different institutions like the legislature, executive, and the judiciary, and even independent statutory bodies like the election commission. And this ensures that even if one institution wants to subvert the constitution, others can check its transgressions. An intelligent system of checks and balances has facilitated the success of the Indian Constitution. Another important aspect of the intelligent institutional design is that a constitution must strike the right balance between the certain values, norms, and procedures as authoritative, and at the same time allow enough flexibility in its operations to adapt to the changing needs and circumstances. Too rigid a constitution is likely to break under the weight of the change. A constitution that is on the other hand, too flexible will give no security, predictability, or identity to a people. Successful constitutions strike the right balance between them, preserving core values and adapting them to the new circumstances. You will notice the wisdom of makers of the Indian Constitution in the chapter on the Constitution as a living document. यहाँ पे जो है, the Indian Constitution is described as a living document by striking a balance between the possibility to change the provisions and the limits on such changes. The Constitution ensured that it will survive as a document respected by the people, and this arrangement also ensures that no section or group can on its own subvert the constitution. Here, why does the cartoonist describe the new Iraqi constitution as the castle of cards? Would this description apply to the Indian constitution also? Here, therefore, in the determining whether a constitution has authority, you can ask yourself three questions. Were the people who enacted the constitution credible? And this question will be answered in the remaining part of this chapter. Secondly, did the constitution ensure that power was intelligently organized so that it was not easy for any group to subvert the constitution? And most importantly, does the constitution give everyone some reasons to go along with it? And most of this book is about this question. Although also is the constitution the locus of people's hopes and aspirations, the ability of the constitution to command voluntary allegiance of the people depends to a certain extent upon whether the constitution is just. What are the principles of the justice underlying the Indian constitution? The last chapter of this book will answer this question. How was the Indian constitution made? Let us find out how the Indian constitution was made. Formally, the constitution was made by the Constituent Assembly, which had been elected by undivided India. It held its first sitting on the 9 December 1946 and resembled at Constituent Assembly for divided India on 14 August 1947. Its members were chosen by indirect elections by the members of the provincial legislative assemblies that had been established under the Government of India Act 1935, and the Constituent Assembly was composed roughly along the lines suggested by the plan proposed by the Committee of the British Cabinet known as the Cabinet Mission. According to this plan, each province and each princely states or groups of states were allotted seats proportional to their respective population, roughly in the ratio of 1:10 lakh. As a result of the province that were under direct British rule were to elect 292 members, while the princely states were allotted a minimum of 93 seats, and the seats in each province were distributed among the three main communities, Muslims, Sikhs, and general, in the proportion to their respective populations. Members of each community in the provincial legislative assembly elected their own representatives by the method of proportional representation with a single transferable vote. The method of selection in this case of the representatives of the princely states was to be determined by the consultation. We must make our political democracy a social democracy as well. Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of its social democracy. What does social democracy means? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life. And these principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity are not to be treated as separate items in a trinity, and they form a union of trinity in the sense that to diverse one from the other is to defeat the very purpose of democracy. Liberty cannot be divorced from the equality. Equality cannot be divorced from the liberty, nor can liberty and equality be divorced from fraternity. Without equality, liberty would produce the supremacy of the few over the many. Equality without liberty would kill individual initiative. Without fraternity, liberty and equality could not become a natural course of things. डॉक्टर भीमराव अम्बेडकर, ये जो है 25 नवंबर 1949 इधर चीज़ें लिखी हुई थी, are the principles of the liberty, equality and fraternity being practiced in your classroom. how can they coexist? Discuss this with your friends. Now, the previous section discusses the three factors that make a constitution effective and respectable. How far does the Indian constitution pass this test? Now, composition of the Constituent Assembly. As a consequence of the partition under the plan of the 3 June 1947, those members who were elected from the territories which fell under Pakistan ceased to be members of the Constituent Assembly, and the number of the members in the assembly was reduced to 299, and the constitution was adopted on 26 November 1949, and 284 members were actually present on 24 January 1950 and appended their signature to the constitution as finally passed, and the constitution came into force on 26 January 1950, and the constitution was thus framed against the backdrop of the horrendous violence that the partition unleashed on the subcontinent. But it is a tribute to the fortitude of the framers, that they were not only able to draft a constitution under the immense pressure, but also learned the right lessons from the unimaginable violence that accompanied the partition. And the constitution was committed to a new conception of citizenship, where not only would minorities be secure, but religious identities would have no bearing on citizenship rights. But this account of the composition of the Constituent Assembly that crafted the constitution touches upon only the surface of how our constitution was made. Although the members of the assembly were not elected by the universal suffrage, there was a serious attempt to make the assembly a representative body. Members of all the religions were given representations under the scheme described above. In addition, the assembly had 28 members from the schedule castes. In terms of the political parties, the Congress dominated the assembly, occupying as many as 82% of the seats in the assembly. After the partition, the Congress itself such a diverse party that it managed to accommodate almost all the sets of the opinion within it. Here, what would have happened if the Constituent Assembly was elected by all the people of India? Could it be very different from what it was? And now next, the principle of deliberation. The authority of the Constituent Assembly does not come only from the fact that it was broadly, though not perfectly representative. It comes from the procedures it adopted to frame the Constitution and the values its members brought to their deliberations. While in any assembly that claims to be representative, it is desirable that diverse sections of the society participate. It is equally important that they participate not only as representatives of their own identity or community. Each member deliberated upon the constitution with the interests of the whole nation in mind. And there were often disagreements amongst the members, but few of these disagreements could be traced to members protecting their own interests. And there were legitimate differences of the principles, and the differences were many. Should India adopt a centralized or decentralized systems of the governments? What should be the relations between the states and the center? What should be the powers of the judiciary? Should the constitution protect property rights? Almost every issue that lies at the foundation of a modern state was discussed with the great sophistication. Only one provisions of the constitution was passed without virtually any debate, and the introduction of the universal suffrage, meaning that all the citizens reaching a certain age would be entitled to be voters irrespective of religion, caste, education, gender, or income. So while the member felt no need at all to discuss the issue of who should have the right to vote, every other matters was seriously discussed and debated. Nothing can be a better testament to the democratic commitment of this assembly. The constitution drew its authority from the fact that members of the Constituent Assembly enraged in what one might call public reason, and the member of the assembly placed a great emphasis on the discussion and reasoned argument, and they did not simply advance their own interests but gave principled reasons to other members for their positions. The very act of giving reasons to the other members to others make you move away from the simply narrow considerations of your own interests, because you have to give reasons to others to make them go along with your viewpoint. The voluminous debates in the Constituent Assembly, where each clause of the constitution was subjected to scrutiny and debate, is a tribute to a public region at its best. These debates deserved to be memorialized as one of the most significant chapters in the history of the constitution making, equal in the importance to the French and American revolutions. उसके बाद जो next है वो क्या है? The President of the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and the Chairman of the Drafting Committee, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, greeting each other. I have realized, as nobody else could have, with what zeal and devotion the members of the Drafting Committee and especially its chairman Dr. Ambedkar, in the spite of his indifferent health, have worked. We could never make a decision which was or could be ever so right as when we put him on the drafting committee and made him its chairman. He has not only justified his selection but has added luster to the work which he has done. In this connection, it would be invidious to make any distinction other members as among the other members of the committee. I know they have all worked with the same zeal and devotion as its chairman, and they deserve the thanks of the country. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, 26 November 1949. की बात है. Now, next procedures. The importance of public regions was emphasized in the mundane procedure of the assembly as well, and the constituent assembly had 8 major committees on different subjects. Usually Jawaharlal Nehru, Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel or Bhimrao Ambedkar chaired these committees, and these were not men who agreed with each other on many things. Ambedkar had been a bitter critic of the Congress and Gandhi, accusing them of not doing enough for the upliftment of the scheduled castes. Patel and Nehru disagreed on many issues. Nevertheless, they all worked together. Each committee usually drafted particular provisions of the constitutions which were then subjected to debate by the entire assembly. Usually an attempt was made to reach a consensus with the belief that provisions agreed to by all would not be detrimental to any particular interest. Some provisions were subjected to the vote, but in each instance, every single argument, query, or concern was responded to with great care and in writing. The assembly met for 166 days, spread over 2 years and 11 months. Its sessions were open to the press and the public alike. And then उसके बाद जो next है वो क्या है? Inheritance of the national movement. So inheritance of the national movement की अगर हम बात करें, but no constitutions is simply no constitution. देखो, inheritance of the nationalist movements, but no constitution is simply a product of the assembly that produces it. An assembly as diverse as the Constituent Assembly of India could not have functional if there was no background consensus on the main principles of the constitution should enshrine. So these principles were forced during the long struggle for the freedom. In a way, the Constituent Assembly was giving concrete shape and form to principles it had inherited from the nationalist movements for decades preceding the promulgation of the constitution. The nationalist movement had debated many questions that were relevant to the making of the constitution and the shape and form of the government India should have, the value it should uphold, and the inequalities it should overcome. Answers forced in those debates were given their final form in the constitution. Perhaps the best summary of the principles that the nationalist movement brought to the Constituent Assembly is the objective resolution, and the resolution that defined the aims of the Assembly moved by the Nehru in the 1946. And this resolution encapsulated the aspirations and values behind the Constitution, what the previous section terms as substantive provisions of the Constitution is inspired by and summed up by the values incorporated in the objective resolutions. Based on this resolution, our Constitution gave institutional expressions to these fundamental committees: equality, liberty, democracy, sovereignty, and cosmopolitan identity. Thus, our Constitution is not merely a maze of rules and procedures, but a moral commitment to establish a government that will fulfill the many promises that the nationalist movements held before the people. Now, next is here main points of the objective resolution. So, India is an independent sovereign republic. India should be a union of erstwhile British Indian territories, Indian states, and other parts outside British India. And Indian states are willing to be a part of the union. Territories forming the union shall be autonomous units and exercise all the powers and functions of the government and administration except those assigned to or vested in the union. All powers and authority of the sovereign and independent India and its constitutions shall flow from the people. All people of India shall be guaranteed and secured social, economic, and political justice, equality of status and opportunities, and equality before law, and fundamental freedoms of the speech, expressions, belief, faith, worship, vocations, associations, and actions subjected to law and public morality. And the minorities, backward and tribal areas, depressed, and other backward classes shall be provided adequate safeguards. The territorial integrity of the Republic and its sovereign rights on the land, sea, and air shall be maintained according to the justice and law of civilized nations. and the law would make full and willing contribution to the promotion of world peace and welfare of mankind. Now, next is institutional arrangements. So, the third factor ensuring effectiveness of a constitution is a balanced arrangement of the institutions of the government, and the basic principle. And the basic principle is that the government must be democratic and committed to the welfare of the people. And the Constituent Assembly spent a lot of time on the evolving the right balance among the various institutions like the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, and this led to the adoption of the parliamentary form and the federal arrangements, which would distribute governmental powers between the legislature and the executives on the one hand, and between the states and central governments on the other hand. While evolving the most balanced governmental arrangements, the makers of our constitution did not hesitate to learn from the experiments and experiences of the other countries. Thus, the framers of the constitution were not averse to borrowing from the other constitutional traditions. Indeed, it is a testament to their wide learning that they could lay their hands upon any intellectuals, arguments, or historical example that was necessary for fulfilling the task at hand. So, they borrowed a number of provisions from the different countries. But borrowing these ideas was not slavish imitation. Far from it. Each provision of the constitution had to be defended on the grounds that it was suited to Indian problems and aspirations. India was extremely lucky to have an assembly that, instead of being parochial in its outlook, could take the best available everywhere in the world and make it their own. Here, was it a borrowed constitution? Then why could we not have a constitution that does not borrow anything from the anywhere else? Now, next is here. One likes to ask whether there can be anything new in the constitution framed at this hour in the history of the world. The only new things, if there can be any in a constitution framed so late in the day, are the variations made to remove the faults and to accommodate it to the needs of the country. And here we are, this is Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. Now, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar presiding over discussion in the Constituent Assembly. In the Constituent Assembly, here provisions adapted from the constitutions of the different countries. So let's see. British Constitution first past the post, parliamentary form of the government, and the idea of the rule of law, institutions of the speaker and her or his role, and law-making procedure. Irish Constitution say directive principle of state policy. French Constitution say principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Canadian Constitution say a quasi-federal form of government, a federal system with a strong central government and the idea of residual powers. United States Constitution say Charter of Fundamental Rights, power of judicial review, and independence of the judiciary. Independence of the judiciary. Now, let's see here Constitution why and how. It is a tribute to the wisdom and foresight of the makers of the Constitution that they presented to the nation a document that enshrined fundamental values and highest aspirations shared by the people. And this is one of the reasons why this most intricately crafted document has not only survived, not become a living reality when so many other constitutions have perished with the paper they were first written on. India's Constitution is a unique document which in turn became an exemplar for the many other constitutions, most notably South Africa. The main purpose behind the long search that went on for almost 3 years was to strike the right balance so that institutions created by the Constitution would not be haphazard or tentative arrangements, but would be able to accommodate the aspirations of the people of India for a long time to come. And you will know more about these arrangements through the study of the remaining chapters in this book. ठीक है, तो ये हो गया हमारा चैप्टर फर्स्ट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन वाई एंड हाउ. थैंक यू सो मच फॉर वाचिंग. एंड कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन से रिलेटेड इस बुक में और भी चैप्टर्स हैं. ठीक है, और भी चैप्टर्स जो हैं कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन से रिलेटेड कौन कौन से हैं. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन से रिलेटेड जो चैप्टर्स हैं पहले हम जो है वही देख लेंगे इसमें. फर्स्ट के बाद कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के बाद हम बात करेंगे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन एज ए लिविंग डॉक्यूमेंट की. फिर हम बात करेंगे द फिलोसफी ऑफ द इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की.